A millionaire saves and adopts a child who lost their parents in a mysterious accident. Sometime later, they are shocked to discover the reason behind the accident. Before the story begins, comment below which city you're watching the video from. We love getting to know our viewers. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more exciting stories. Enjoy the story and see you soon. The storm didn't just bring rain, but secrets buried that the coastal city had long forgotten, or perhaps never wanted to remember. It was a dark and cold afternoon. The salty sea breeze struck the city's walls with force, a place marked by poverty and tragedy. The streets, once filled with laughter and games, now only whispered laments and echoed the steps of lost souls. No one dared to remember what happened that fateful night when tragedy took so many lives, including the families of 5 children who were now nothing more than shadows wandering in the darkness. Sophia, the youngest of them, was barely 10 years old, but she had already tasted the bitter reality of survival. Though her face reflected the fragility of her age, her eyes shone with an unshakable determination. This little orphan was the one who, despite everything, seemed to carry on with a hope that none of the other children had. For her, every day was an opportunity, even though the city told her otherwise. That night, however, fate played its last card, and it wasn't one of hope. The storm roared as if the city itself wanted to swallow the ones who remained. The wind howled furiously, sweeping everything in its path. While Sophia ran through the wet streets, looking for shelter for herself and her brothers, the ground beneath her feet gave way. In the blink of an eye, Sophia's world collapsed. She fell face first onto the slippery rocks, and darkness enveloped her. In that moment, her thoughts were like fleeting flashes. I can't let this end like this. My brothers need me to survive. But silence came quickly. The pain and cold were so intense that time seemed to stop. Sophia, aware that her body no longer responded, could barely keep her eyes open. She knew something worse than the storm was coming. And that's when she saw him. A solitary figure emerged from the darkness, like a shadow in the midst of the storm, Samuel Torres. His face, marked by the weight of years and the decisions that consumed him, reflected in the black waters around him. No one had seen him in years, not even the townspeople. A solitary man, a former millionaire who lived isolated in the mountains, always surrounded by rumors and mystery. Some said he lost everything because of an irreparable mistake. Others, that he had never forgiven himself for his daughter's death. With a determination that could have been either compassion or desperation, Samuel carefully lifted Sophia, carrying her toward his mansion, located atop the mountains. He didn't understand why he was doing it. Perhaps it was human instinct pushing him, or maybe destiny was giving him one last chance for redemption. This man, who'd been unable to save his own daughter, now carried the weight of a broken soul, facing the shadows of his own past. Meanwhile, in the village, no one dared to ask what had happened to Sophia, and even less, how Samuel Torres, the man everyone thought was lost, had become her savior. That night, as the storm continued to batter the city, Sophia and Samuel's lives intertwined in a way neither of them could understand. In the mansion, surrounded by darkness and silence, Samuel found himself facing a dilemma he hadn't even imagined. Perhaps this time he could redeem the pain of his soul, or maybe he would make everything worse. But what neither of them knew yet was that the truth they both carried in their hearts, the truth about the accident that destroyed so many lives, was about to come to light, and with it, new questions would arise, questions that no one, not even Samuel, could answer. The price of redemption is not paid with wealth or deeds, but with the weight of the decisions that chase us, one by one, until the last breath. Samuel Torres watched the rain fall through the window of his mansion. The constant sound of the drops hitting the glass seemed to blend with the voices of his past, the ones he could never silence. Each drop, each lightning flash reminded him of what he had lost, what he had destroyed with his own hands. Before everything, Samuel had been a rich man, known for his brilliant mind and his ability to make business deals that transformed lives. His fortune was built on a project that promised to change the fate of the coastal city, but his arrogance and obsession with success blinded him. It was a fatal mistake, an impulsive decision that cost thousands of lives. Among them, his daughter Isabel's. Isabel had been his light, his reason to keep going in a world full of opportunities. But Samuel thought he could fix everything with one last attempt to salvage the irreparable. He believed the project could give them a second chance, even after his company had collapsed. That day, his daughter was at the site where he had decided to press on, without considering the consequences. The result was catastrophic. The pain of losing Isabel consumed him, and since then, Samuel had withdrawn from the world, seeking refuge in his isolated mansion, hoping time would erase his guilt. But time, as he well knew, does not heal wounds. It only makes them deeper. Now, his life was solitary. His name no longer held the power it once had. The few who still remembered his face looked at him with disdain, and his fortune, which had once been his pride, no longer existed. All that remained was a constant reminder of what he had destroyed. The mansion, large and cold, had become his prison, a place where the echoes of his past decisions never let him rest. But that night, something changed. The appearance of Sophia, the girl he had found unconscious during the storm, broke the routine Samuel had built. There was something about her that puzzled him. Perhaps it was the innocence in her eyes, or perhaps a part of him felt that through her he might find some redemption. He didn't know. He just knew he couldn't leave her in the streets, alone and at the mercy of the storm. While the girl rested in one of the mansion's rooms, Samuel sat in his study, surrounded by books that no longer offered him answers. He thought about what he had done, the damage he had caused not only to his daughter, but to everyone who had trusted him. He thought about the orphanages, the children like Sophia, whose lives had been destroyed by his mistake. The echo of the storm outside made him feel as though time were chasing him. More and more, Samuel knew he couldn't escape his past. The death of Isabel had been his condemnation, but now, with the children nearby, he realized that perhaps he could do something for them. Perhaps, through them, he could find the peace he so desperately sought. But the children didn't see him through the same eyes. Raphael, the oldest, had already shown signs of distrust. The hatred in his eyes was clear. He believed Samuel was responsible for his mother's death, although Samuel had no idea how that young man's fate was intertwined with his. Anna, the quietest of them, seemed to see something else in him, something Samuel himself didn't understand. Louisa, on the other hand, showed a strange admiration, a hope that was almost unbearable. A broken soul doesn't always seek healing, but sometimes the arrival of others forces us to face what we never wanted to see. The following days passed in the mansion with an odd calm, so foreign to the chaos that ruled the coastal city. Samuel began to get used to Sophia's presence, who was slowly recovering from her injuries. The girl, despite her frail body, showed an unbreakable strength in her gaze. But what really troubled Samuel was the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about the moment he had decided to bring her there. Why did he do it? There was no way fate had pushed him into this situation. Perhaps, just perhaps, he needed redemption. But he didn't know that yet. The days passed, and little by little the other children began to approach, drawn by the fact that Sophia was alive. One by one they arrived at the mansion, though not all with the same intention. Raphael, the oldest, was the first to arrive. Standing before the mansion's door, his face remained impassive, but his eyes did not lie. He carried with him the anger of years of loneliness, of loss. Raphael blamed Samuel for his mother's death, although he still did not understand the whole story. No one knew. Only he, with his defiant gaze, approached the man who had been part of his life, even though he hadn't known it. "Where is Sophia?" he asked coldly, looking at Samuel as if he could pierce him with his gaze. Samuel, sitting near the fireplace, watched him for a moment before responding, "She's resting. She's safe here." "Safe? From what? From you?" Raphael clenched his fists, but Samuel did not back down. He knew that in his youth he had caused a great deal of harm, but he wasn't willing to let Raphael's anger cloud his judgment. Deep inside, he knew he would need to earn the children's trust if he hoped to offer them something better. Anna arrived the next day. The shy girl, her face full of doubts and a deep pain in her eyes, barely dared to look at Samuel. There was something about her that made him feel pity. The little one, so fragile, seemed like a shadow of what she had once been. As she sat next to Sophia, her gaze remained fixed, as if searching for something she could not find. Samuel noticed the loneliness that surrounded her, but he didn't know how to approach her. The pain she carried seemed as deep as his own. Louisa, always so optimistic, was next. With a shy smile, she entered the mansion, as if this isolated place were just a temporary refuge. While everyone kept their distance, Louisa walked up to Samuel without fear. "I know there's good in you. Sophia told me you saved her." The girl, so full of hope, seemed willing to believe the best in people. Samuel didn't know how to react to the blind faith Louisa was offering him. In his world of guilt, no one had trusted him in a long time. Finally, Marcos, the quietest of them all, appeared. Unlike the others, he wasn't filled with hatred or empty hope. Marcos only wanted answers. He had lost his family in the accident, but his logical mind drove him to search for the truth. In his eyes, Samuel saw something he hadn't seen in a long time, an opportunity to explain the unexplainable. "The truth, Samuel. I need to know what happened that night," he said, with a calmness that surprised Samuel. Samuel felt a knot in his stomach. Each child had arrived with a different story, but they all shared a similar wound. The arrival of these children, with their fears, their anger, their pain, and in some cases their hope, represented the opportunity Samuel had never asked for, but now felt he had to face. He didn't know if he could redeem what he had done, but one thing was certain. His life was no longer just in his hands. These children, in their suffering, in their pain, were pushing him towards something much bigger than himself. The question was, could he bear it? The storm not only batters the body, but also the soul, and the deepest wounds are not always the ones that are seen. The air in the mansion was thick, charged with a tension that even the walls of the old house couldn't hide. The children, though in the same place, kept their distance, as if each one were trapped in a world of their own. Sophia, still weak, rested in one of the rooms, surrounded by silence. Raphael, who had arrived with so much hatred in his eyes, now stood at the threshold of the door, not daring to cross it. Samuel felt that the presence of the children weighed on him more than anything else. The mansion, which had been his refuge for so many years, now felt like a cage. He didn't know how to confront his own demons, let alone those of these children. But despite the internal storm that consumed him, Samuel tried to remain firm. That night, the storm seemed to take on a life of its own, its fury intensifying with every passing second. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and the rain pounded violently as if nature itself wanted to tear away the secrets Samuel had been keeping for so long. Sophia woke suddenly. The sound of the storm had jolted her from a deep sleep. Still aching, she slowly sat up, remembering that she was not in the streets, not alone. She looked toward the window, seeing the shadows of the tree branches moving in rhythm with the wind. Suddenly, she heard a soft knock on the door. Samuel's figure appeared, his weary gaze and serious expression. "Are you all right, little one?" he asked, his voice soft but carrying a concern he had never shown before. Sophia, though confused by his sudden kindness, nodded slowly. "Yes, just the storm scares me." Samuel didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood by the window for a moment. The storm was a reflection of his own mind, violent, chaotic, full of resentment and regret. "I want to know what happened," she suddenly said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I want to know what happened to my family, and why. Why did you bring me here?" Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't prepared for that question. In his mind, those words were like a sentence. The truth he had been avoiding for years was now in front of him, in the eyes of a girl who still didn't understand the magnitude of what she was asking. "I'm not sure I can answer you, Sophia," he finally replied, his voice broken. "There are things that can't be explained, but I promise you, you don't have to fear me. What happened, the reason you're here, has to do with my past, and I'm trying to do what's right now." Sophia looked at him with a mix of distrust and curiosity. "And what is the right thing, Samuel?" The words hung in the air, like a question without an answer. Samuel didn't know if there was a way to do the right thing. Could he amend the irreparable? Could he redeem a past so full of blood and pain? "You'll find out soon," he finally said, unable to avoid a sigh of resignation. In the distance, a loud thunderclap was heard, followed by a lightning strike that illuminated the mansion. At that moment, a figure appeared in the doorway. Raphael. "What are you doing here, Samuel?" he asked in a harsh voice, as if he no longer had patience for any more mysteries. Samuel didn't answer immediately, but Sophia saw his face tense at the sight of the young man. She knew that Raphael wasn't there just out of curiosity. Something else was driving him, something he wasn't even willing to admit to himself. "I came to talk to Sophia," Samuel said, without looking directly at him. "She has the right to know." Raphael snorted and took a step toward them, his gaze scorching. "I don't care what you have to say. I want to know what happened that night. I want to know why my mother, why she..." The word mother came out through gritted teeth, as if he still couldn't fully accept it. When Samuel heard it, he felt the weight of everything he had done. It wasn't just guilt that haunted him, but the fear of finally facing the consequences. Raphael didn't want answers, he wanted revenge, and Samuel knew it. "Raphael," Samuel began, his voice trembling, I don't know how to start." But at that moment, the storm unleashed all its fury, and the sound of thunder became so deafening it interrupted his words. The only thing that remained in the air was the silence, heavy with tension, both external and internal. The doors to the past had finally opened, and with them everything Samuel had feared. The truth was on the verge of being revealed, and there would be no way to stop it. A lie can be a refuge, but only for a while. The truth always finds its way. The wind had stopped howling with force, but the storm continued to echo in the hearts of everyone present. The mansion, which had once been Samuel's refuge, now felt like a place filled with ghosts. Not only his own past, but the ghosts of the children who were beginning to question everything. Sophia had returned to her room after her conversation with Samuel. The question she had asked him about her family and why he had rescued her kept swirling in her mind. But there was still something else she couldn't understand. The fear in Samuel's eyes, his discomfort when talking about his past. There was something there that didn't add up. Meanwhile, Raphael kept wandering around the mansion. His eyes, filled with rage, followed Samuel with every step he took. There was no forgiveness for him. For Raphael, the man before him was responsible for the death of his mother, a man whose wealth had been built on the suffering of others, and now, in his isolation, seemed to be seeking redemption through the lives of those children. Despite his fears, Samuel had finally decided that he could no longer hide from his past. The pain he had been carrying for so many years, the weight of the guilt for Isabel's death, and the feeling that his life no longer had purpose, had led him here, to this moment of confrontation with the children, with Raphael in particular. "I need to know the truth," Raphael said, breaking the tense silence that had formed in the air. His fury was not only directed at Samuel, but also at himself. The pain he felt made him doubt everything he knew. Samuel remained silent for a moment, looking into Raphael's eyes. There was no way to hide what had happened that night, he knew. His mistake, his failure, had destroyed everything. But telling the truth meant facing his worst nightmare. "What happened that night?" "It wasn't an accident," Samuel began, his voice shaky. "I thought I could save her, your mother, Isabel, but everything went wrong. It was a project I should never have started. The system I built to try to save them, it only led them to death." Raphael couldn't contain himself. "Liar!" he shouted, his face turning red with rage. "My mother wasn't part of the project. My mother died because of you, because of your damn decisions. I can't listen to any more of your excuses." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the pressure of everything crushing him. The truth he had been avoiding his entire life had finally come out, but the pain was stronger than ever. "It wasn't an excuse, Raphael," he said calmly. "What happened was a failure, but I thought I could save them all. Your mother was in the wrong place at the wrong time. No one could have foreseen. No one knew what was going to happen." Samuel's voice cracked, but Raphael didn't let him finish. "And my mother never had a chance, because you thought you could play God. Don't talk to me about saving anyone. You destroyed lives." Silence settled again, but this time it was even heavier. Samuel looked at the young man with eyes full of remorse, but also deep resignation. Raphael wasn't ready to listen. No one was. Suddenly, a soft yet firm voice interrupted the scene. "Is this what you wanted to hear?" Anna said, appearing in the doorway with a sad but determined look. "Or do you just want to keep filling yourselves with hate?" Raphael turned toward her, and for a moment, the rage in his eyes faded. Anna wasn't like the others. She wasn't as resentful or as filled with anger. She seemed to understand something the others couldn't. "You're right, Raphael," Anna continued. "We can keep looking for someone to blame, or we can try to understand what happened. Life isn't just black and white." "And what do you know about that, Anna?" Raphael replied, his anger flaring up again. "Do you know what it's like to lose everyone you love?" Anna didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at Samuel, whose gaze was no longer filled with fury, but with sadness. "It's not about what we know or don't know. It's about what we decide to do with what we feel." Samuel felt as though those words pierced through him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the world was against him. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to do what was right. But that meant facing the truth, not just of his past, but of his future. The lie he had been hiding for so long had finally been uncovered. Now the only possible path was confrontation, but also the acceptance that the scars, though deep, could be healed if faced with honesty. But in that mansion, every step toward the truth seemed to be surrounded by more questions, and every answer left more wounds than before. The past is not forgotten, it's carried, and in every shadow, the echo of what we were follows us. Dawn came silently, as if the storm from the night before had left only a whisper in the air. Samuel was sitting by the window, watching as the light began to seep through the clouds. The wind no longer howled, but in his chest, the sound of Raphael's screams, the accusations, the words of the children still resonated. The truth he had been avoiding for so long could no longer be ignored. Each of the children, with their own pains and losses, seemed to draw closer to him, but at the same time, they were drifting away. It wasn't just the guilt that consumed him, but the weight of everything he had done, and what still remained to be done. Sophia, still recovering from her injuries, walked cautiously through the mansion. Every corner of the house seemed strange to her, and despite the hospitality Samuel had tried to offer, she couldn't help but feel a disconnect, a void between herself and the other children. In the living room, Louisa was sitting by the fireplace, with a thoughtful expression. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, not looking up from the fire. "It seems like everything is about to explode." Marcos, who had been silently observing from the back, stood up with a determined expression. "What we need to do is find the truth. Don't you see? Samuel isn't the only one who needs to face what happened that night. We all need to understand what happened to us. If we don't, we'll never move forward." Raphael had gone out to the garden, looking for fresh air, as if he wanted to escape everything around him. But he couldn't. There was no escape for him. No one in that house was free from the chains of their past. And his past didn't just haunt him, it haunted everyone. Anna, on the other hand, approached Samuel, who was still sitting by the window, lost in his thoughts. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness he couldn't hide. "Every day," he replied sincerely, "but regret doesn't change what happened. I can only do what I can now." Anna nodded, but there was a mix of understanding and compassion on her face. "You don't have to do it all alone. Maybe we can help, even if we don't know how." "Help?" Samuel replied, almost with irony. "How? When all I have is a past full of shadows, and I don't know if I have anything good to offer." But Anna didn't stop. "We all have shadows, Samuel, but we also have light. And sometimes the light doesn't appear until we're surrounded by darkness." Those words resonated with Samuel more than he expected. The idea that light could emerge amid all that pain and despair seemed almost absurd, but at the same time, he felt there was something in them that gave him hope. That afternoon, the children decided to join him in an attempt to unravel the mystery surrounding their lives. Though each had their own wounds, they knew they couldn't heal alone. Raphael, though reluctant, finally agreed to participate, with the promise that they would seek answers, no matter how painful they were. Suddenly, a loud noise interrupted the silence. The door of the mansion slammed open, and an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway, a tall man, with a stern expression, wearing a black coat. Samuel immediately stood up, recognizing the man before he spoke a word. "What are you doing here?" Samuel asked, his tone tense, though he tried to remain calm. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the children, their eyes fixed on him, filled with suspicion. "I came to talk about what happened that night," he said finally, and his voice sounded like an echo of something Samuel had tried to forget. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. How could this man know something about that night? What secrets did he still hide? "Who are you?" Raphael asked, stepping forward, not hiding his distrust. The man looked at each of the children and then, in a deep voice, replied, "I'm part of the story everyone's trying to forget. And now, I've come to reveal it." The man's words lingered in the air, like a forewarning that something much bigger was about to unfold. The past Samuel had been trying to bury had returned with an unprecedented force, and for the first time, all the children felt that in that instant, their lives might change forever. The door of the mansion closed behind him, and the shadow of what was to come began to loom over them. The truth was about to be revealed, but each answer would bring more questions. And in that mansion, everyone would have to face what they had been avoiding for so long, the wounds of the past, which never heal completely. Every decision we make leads us down a path, but we never know what awaits us at the end. The man who had unexpectedly arrived at the mansion stood still, watching the children with an unsettling calm. Samuel, who had recognized him immediately, tried to keep his composure, though his mind was spinning frantically. Why now? Why had this man chosen to appear at this crucial moment? And most importantly, what did he really know about what happened that night? Raphael was the first to step forward, his eyes filled with distrust and rage. "Who are you? And what do you want from us?" he asked, his voice trembling with fury. He wasn't willing to let himself be intimidated by a stranger, especially after everything he had discovered about Samuel. The man stared at him without flinching. "My name is Gabriel Alvarez," he replied, his tone grave. "And if you're willing to listen, I can help you understand what happened that night. Everything you've been searching for, all the truth about the project and your families, I have it." Those words hit the children like a bolt of lightning. Sophia, who had stayed on the sidelines, looked to Samuel for some reaction, but he didn't seem surprised. In fact, Samuel was pale, as if Gabriel Alvarez's name brought painful memories with it. "What do you know about that night?" Samuel asked finally, his voice almost inaudible. "That night was a disaster. Everything went out of control. I don't want any more lies tormenting us." Gabriel Alvarez nodded slowly. "I'm not here to lie to you, Samuel. I've come to give you answers, though I know those answers won't be easy to accept." Sophia, who had always been the most curious and determined of the group, couldn't contain her anxiety. "Will you tell us what really happened?" she asked, her eyes shining with the hope that she could finally understand everything she had lost. Gabriel looked directly at her, as if weighing the significance of his words before speaking. "Yes, but first, you must be prepared to listen, because what happened that night changed the lives of everyone involved." Anna, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "We're ready," she said, her voice firm, though trembling. "We want to know the truth." Gabriel sighed deeply, as if carrying a burden much heavier than his words could convey. "What happened that night wasn't an accident. Samuel, you and I both know that what you tried to do, that project we talked about, wasn't just about saving people. It was a desperate attempt to redeem yourself, to correct your mistakes, but it was already too late." Samuel lowered his head, feeling the weight of Gabriel's words. I know, he murmured, almost as if speaking to himself. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I only thought about Isabel, about my daughter." Gabriel interrupted him. "The idea for the project wasn't the problem. The problem was what you didn't know, what you couldn't foresee. The resources you used, the time you tried to gain, it all turned against you. And it wasn't just Isabel's death that triggered the disaster, but the deaths of everyone else involved. Each one of them sacrificed themselves, thinking they would save another. But in the end, they were all victims of your decisions." Sophia, hearing those words, began to understand the magnitude of what had really happened. The lie that Samuel had been hiding for so long hadn't only destroyed his own life, but the lives of others, including hers. "But my mom had nothing to do with that project," said Raphael, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and pain. "She didn't deserve to die. You dragged her into all of this." Gabriel looked at him with compassion. "I know, son. I lost a lot that night too, but it all started when they tried to save the irreparable. Your mother's life, mine, and everyone who was there became part of a chain of wrong decisions. The blame isn't only Samuel's. We are all responsible." The air in the room grew dense, as if Gabriel's words had released something that couldn't be contained. No one spoke for a long time. Samuel, his face marked by regret, looked at each of the children as if searching for a way to explain himself, to make them understand that his pain was also theirs. Finally, Marcos, who had been silently observing, spoke. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice firm but filled with uncertainty. "Now that we know the truth, what's going to happen to all of us?" Gabriel took a deep breath before answering. "What you do now depends on you. The truth won't change what happened, but it may give you the chance to heal. But to do that, you must forgive, not just Samuel, but yourselves." Samuel looked up, and for the first time in a long time, he saw something different in the children's eyes. It wasn't hatred, not even fear. It was something closer to understanding. "Forgive?" Sophia repeated. "How can we forgive something so big?" Gabriel looked at each of them, and then, with surprising calm, said, "True healing doesn't come from revenge or justice. It comes from forgiveness. But you must be willing to take that step, even if you don't know what the future holds." Silence descended again, but this time it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of an opportunity, the last chance to find peace amidst all the chaos that had marked their lives. The question now was, would they be willing to take it? Soon, the future of everyone would depend on a single act: to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but freeing yourself from the past to live fully. The atmosphere in the mansion had changed. No more shouting, no more accusations, no more silences filled with resentment. Something in the air had transformed the environment, as if an invisible weight had been lightened, but at the same time, uncertainty still lingered. The children, though touched by Gabriel's revelations, didn't know what to do with the truth that had come to light. Samuel, for his part, felt that Gabriel's words still echoed in his mind, reminding him of the magnitude of his guilt. As the days passed, the mansion became filled with a strange stillness. No one knew how to begin healing, not even Samuel, who, despite his desire for redemption, felt completely lost. The truth had been a hard blow, more than he had anticipated. Gabriel's words kept resonating in his mind. True healing doesn't come from revenge or justice. It comes from forgiveness. But how could he forgive himself? How could he expect others to forgive him? Raphael, ever impulsive, had decided to spend most of his time outside the mansion. He would go for walks in the nearby fields, searching for answers he couldn't find. Yet, his heart was still filled with rage. How could he forgive Samuel when he felt that his mother had died because of him? The pain wouldn't fade, and every time he looked at him, he saw the man who had ruined his life. There was no forgiveness that could heal that wound. Anna, on the other hand, had begun to find comfort in Gabriel's words. Although her heart was broken, she felt that there was something beyond the rage and bitterness, something that could free them all from the burden of the past. She spent hours talking with him, trying to understand how to find peace amidst so much suffering. But not everyone shared her vision. "Do you really think forgiveness can fix everything?" Marco said one afternoon, sitting by the window, looking at the horizon. "He's asking us to forget what happened, to step aside and let everyone go on with their lives as if nothing ever happened. I can't do that." Sophia, who had been listening in silence, approached Marcos. "It's not about forgetting," she said softly. "Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it gives us the chance to live without it destroying us. If we don't do it, we'll never be able to move on." Marcos looked at her, confused. "And do you think Samuel deserves forgiveness after everything he's done?" Sophia looked at him steadily, her eyes full of a mixture of sadness and wisdom. "I don't know if he deserves it, but I know that we need to forgive, to be free." Samuel, who had been listening from the threshold of the door, felt a knot form in his stomach. He couldn't help but feel that his own mistakes had put the children in a situation they should never have been in. Despite Gabriel's words, despite everything he had tried to do to atone for his failures, he still couldn't forgive himself. Every time he saw the children, especially Raphael, he saw their eyes filled with distrust, and hatred, and that destroyed him inside. One afternoon, while Samuel was walking through the garden, reflecting on everything that had happened, he ran into Raphael. The young man didn't look directly at him, but Samuel could feel his presence. Finally, after several minutes of silence, Raphael spoke. "Do you think forgiveness can fix it?" he said, his voice cold but filled with repressed emotions. "My mom isn't here, Samuel. She no longer has the chance to forgive you." Samuel took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I know," he responded humbly, "and that's why I'm not asking for forgiveness for myself, not even for what I did. I'm asking for forgiveness for what I did to you, for what I did to all of you. If I could give my life to undo everything that happened, I would, but I can't. All I have now is this moment, and the only thing I can do is ask you to give me a chance over time to make things right." Raphael didn't respond immediately. He looked at Samuel, and for a brief moment they shared a silence full of meaning. It was a heavy silence, but also one filled with a strange acceptance. "I forgive you," Raphael finally said, though his voice wasn't entirely firm. "But that doesn't mean I'll forget. I don't know if I'll ever understand everything that happened, but what I do know is that I can't keep living with this hatred inside of me." Samuel nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Forgiveness, though still distant, was beginning to be part of something much bigger than himself. That night, as the mansion was enveloped in the stillness of darkness, each of the children reflected on Gabriel's words, on what forgiveness meant to them. Despite the deep wounds, there was an unbreakable truth. Forgiveness not only frees the one who receives it, but also the one who offers it. But for everyone, the path to redemption was not going to be easy. Forgiveness was not a quick or simple solution. It was a process, one step at a time, filled with doubts, fears, but also hope. And as they moved forward, they began to understand that true freedom could only be reached when they left behind what bound them. Forgiveness was only the first step toward a new life, and everyone knew there was still much to go through. Redemption is within reach, but true freedom requires more than words. Only when we are willing to lose everything can we find what truly matters. Dawn arrived with a strange stillness in the mansion. The previous days had been long, filled with half-conversations and looks that hid more than they revealed. Everyone knew there was something more waiting to come out, something still unsaid, still unaddressed. The tension could be cut with a knife. Samuel, who had been isolated in his study for the past few weeks, felt a weight in the air. Something had changed. Something inside the children had begun to transform, but he wasn't sure whether that was good or bad. He had done everything he could to make amends for his mistakes, but there was still one last lesson to learn. Redemption is never complete if one is not willing to make the final sacrifice. Raphael, although appearing more calm in his demeanor, still carried the anger he had not fully released. Despite having said he forgave Samuel, his actions didn't always reflect that. The rage remained his constant companion, even though he tried to ignore it. His thoughts, like restless ghosts, wouldn't let him be at peace. Anna, on the other hand, had found a little comfort in Gabriel's words, but she also felt trapped between the pain of the past and the need to move forward. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of what was lost, but she also couldn't fully let go of what had happened. And then, one night, as she talked with Samuel, something inside her broke. "How did you keep going after everything?" Anna asked, her voice soft but full of deep curiosity. "How can you live with the weight of what you did, of what you lost?" Samuel looked at her, knowing there was no easy answer. "I don't know. Sometimes you just keep breathing, but I promise you something, Anna. Forgiveness is not just a word. It's a decision you make every day, and although you may not always believe it, it makes you stronger." Anna watched him in silence, feeling that in that moment she understood a little more about the man who had been her tormentor, but who now also seemed to be a companion in pain. He wasn't the man he had been, but there was still much to heal. Meanwhile, in the garden, Marcos was alone, reflecting on everything he had discovered. He often felt as though everything was a dream he couldn't wake up from. Everything had changed so quickly, the revelations, the forgiveness, Gabriel's presence. Yet his logical mind couldn't process everything that had happened. The truth seemed too big, too overwhelming. If it weren't for his pragmatism, he would have succumbed to despair. "What would you do if you could change things?" Louisa asked, walking up to him without making a sound. "Would you fix everything that happened, or would you let things follow their course?" Marcus looked at her, not knowing what to say. "I don't know," Louisa. "I'm not like you. I don't believe in happy endings, or that everything has a solution. But that doesn't mean we can't do something," she replied with a smile that, though full of hope, also revealed her own uncertainty. Maybe all we need is to believe that the future can still be different. As the children struggled to find their place in this chaos of emotions, Samuel began to notice something strange. Every time he got closer to them, he felt a greater distance. Although forgiveness was in the air, it still didn't feel like a tangible reality. Something still stood between them and him, like an invisible wall growing stronger with every attempt to get closer. The decisive moment arrived on a rainy afternoon, when an unexpected phone call disturbed the relative calm of the mansion. Gabriel Alvarez, who had been distant in recent days, arrived with a somber expression. "There's something you need to know," he said gravely. "The man you think caused the disaster is not dead. He's closer than you think." Samuel turned pale. "What do you mean by that? I thought we had reached the end of this." Gabriel looked at him intently, his eyes filled with unusual urgency. "Everything you've done, everything you've lived through so far has been guided by something much bigger than Samuel. The responsible party wasn't a man making decisions, but a man who was being manipulated." Raphael, who had been at the back of the room, let out a low curse. "What are you saying? Was all of this a lie?" "No," Gabriel responded firmly. "It wasn't a lie, but the pieces of the puzzle that are still missing are yet to fall into place. And if what's coming isn't stopped, all of you will be in danger." Samuel's eyes narrowed, understanding that the final sacrifice was inevitable. Everything he had done up to now, every decision he had made, had led him to this point. One last effort was needed, and this time there was no room for doubt. "Tell us what to do," he said in a tense voice, "because if something else is going to happen, I'm willing to do it." Gabriel looked at him, and on his face appeared an expression that combined desperation with determination. "We must face the real enemy, and for that, someone has to make a sacrifice. The final sacrifice is coming. Are they all willing to lose everything to save what matters most? In the darkest moments, sacrifice becomes the light that guides us toward redemption." Night had fallen like a heavy cloak over the mansion, and the rains did not stop. The echoes of the storm could be heard in every corner, but inside the house, the tension was even more palpable. Samuel, Gabriel, and the children were gathered in the main room, each feeling the weight of what was to come. Gabriel had spoken clearly. Someone would have to make a sacrifice to prevent the disaster that threatened to destroy them all. No one fully understood what he meant, but they all knew it wasn't an empty warning. Something big was about to happen, and the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Samuel, with his heart racing, tried to grasp the magnitude of what Gabriel had said. The enemy they were to face wasn't someone from the past, nor an external figure they could defeat with a simple confrontation. It was something much deeper, something that involved everyone's mistakes, decisions that couldn't be undone, and secrets that, when revealed, would have changed everything. "What does sacrifice mean?" Raphael asked, the rage in his eyes once again, but this time accompanied by fear. "What are we supposed to do?" Gabriel looked at them all, his expression grim, and said, "The sacrifice is not physical but emotional. It is a surrender, a complete acceptance of what we have lost and of what we must let go of. The truth is that all of you are trapped in the past, in vengeance, in guilt. In order to stop what's coming, you must free yourselves from it. Let go of what has kept you captive." Silence filled the room. Each of the children looked at the others, as if searching for the answer in each other's eyes. But none of them had the solution. None knew how to release the weight that had been etched into their souls. Sophia was the first to break the silence. "So, what do we have to do?" "Forgive Samuel. Stop hating him." Samuel felt a pang in his chest as he heard his name. The wound of his guilt, which had never stopped bleeding, reopened. How could he ask for their forgiveness? How could he expect them to do it? He had no right. "It's not about that," Gabriel replied. "Forgiveness is just one part. The sacrifice is deeper. It's about leaving behind the desire for vengeance. It's about abandoning the weight of what can no longer be changed." Marcos, who had always been the most skeptical, stepped forward. "What if the sacrifice is our life? What if we have to give up something greater than our emotions?" Gabriel looked at him intently. "It's not about losing yourselves. It's about finding the truth that will free you, and that truth is within each of you." Gabriel's words resonated in their hearts. The truth. What truth was that? It was what had kept them trapped in pain, in rage, in guilt. It was what had brought them to this point, on the brink of destruction. Suddenly, everyone understood that the sacrifice they had to make wasn't something that would separate them, but something that would unite them. Each one had to abandon their own demons, leave behind the shadows that had chased them, and embrace the possibility of something better. But the question still lingered in the air. Were they willing to do it? Raphael, with his eyes filled with contained tears, stepped forward. I forgive Samuel," he said, his voice trembling, but firm. "But not just that. I forgive what he made me live through. I forgive what he took from me, and with that I free myself." Raphael's words were a silent scream, a liberation for both him and the others. They all looked at each other, their eyes filled with a silent understanding. If he could do it, if he could let go of his hatred, then they would too. Samuel, hearing Raphael's words, felt something inside him break, and he couldn't stop the tears that began to fall. He was finally being freed from the guilt that had tormented him for so many years. Ana, Luisa, and Marcos also took their steps toward sacrifice, though the echo of pain still lingered in their hearts. But they knew they could no longer live under the weight of a past they couldn't change. In the end, the truth they had long sought was found in acceptance, in the ability to embrace their pain and still move forward. The sacrifice was not the loss of something tangible, but the giving of the deepest part of their being, forgiveness, liberation, and the will to change. As they were all gathered in the living room, they heard a loud knock on the front door. The real enemy was not outside, nor in the shadows they thought were lurking. It was within themselves, in the way they saw each other, in the way they treated themselves. But in the end, when they opened the door, they only found calm. The storm had passed. Redemption had arrived. Forgiveness is the sacrifice that frees not only others, but ourselves. Only when we let go of our past can we embrace the future. And so, we come to the end of this intense journey of pain, forgiveness, and redemption. Samuel and the children finally faced their own demons, and with that, they discovered that the greatest sacrifice is not the loss of something material, but the ability to let go of what binds us to the past. True freedom lies in forgiveness and in the acceptance of our mistakes, as we've seen throughout this story. Now, I want to know what you think. What do you think of Raphael's final sacrifice? Was it an act of courage in forgiving Samuel, or simply a way to free himself from hatred? Leave your opinion in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this key moment in the story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories full of mystery and unexpected twists. Your interaction is very important for me to keep bringing more content like this for you. Until next time, and remember, true redemption comes when we learn to forgive ourselves.